So recently I picked up a copy of Blood Bowl. This is the third edition of the game, which was printed, I think, in like the mid-90s, maybe, early 90s. I'm going to say like 94, 95 maybe. And this is sort of a game from my past. My first experience with Games Workshop was buying a copy of the second edition of Blood Bowl in, oh man, I must have been 88 or 89. I think I was in maybe 7th or 8th grade when I bought it. And I saw it sitting on the shelf at my local hobby shop in Fort Wayne, and was just instantly like enraptured by it. It was this huge box, had this crazy artwork. It had the same font, the term Blood Bowl here, and that font has kind of persisted even into like the Fantasy Flight card game version and the PC games, the PC adaptations of the game. They've always kept this like sort of steel-looking, spiky font for the name. So it had that on there, but the box, the second edition was a lot thicker. It was like double the thickness of this, and it was, the artwork was similar. Had a giant ogre on the cover, bashing his way through with a football. I guess here the ogre doesn't have the football. He's defending against the human guy that's running with the football. But similar artwork, it was this fantasy football artwork. And I'm a big football fan, so I was instantly like, oh, orcs and ogres and all these typical fantasy RPG type monsters playing football. Where do I sign up? So I bought it and got many years of play out of it, and got the expansions like Dungeon Bowl and stuff too, which had dwarves and elves miniatures, so I could sort of expand my teams that I had. This was before I did any painting of miniatures, though. I didn't know how to paint them. I didn't even know like how would you get the right size brushes or paints. Like, my hobby stores in Fort Wayne didn't have the big paints section of with all the Citadel I guess it was Citadel miniatures back then and all the Citadel paints. They didn't have all that kind of stuff. I was surprised that they even had a copy of Blood Bowl, to be honest. This was in the late 80s. Games Workshop was still a pretty new thing in the United States. So even seeing it at all was kind of impressive. But I remember seeing, I think the copy of that Blood Bowl that I had a catalog with it or something that had some Warhammer and Warhammer 40K stuff in it, with these big spreads of like the painted armies and everything. And I remember as a kid just thinking that was like the most incredible thing, the coolest thing that I'd ever seen were these huge painted miniature armies. But I had no idea how to paint or do any of that stuff. So I just played the football game with the unpainted miniatures, with my friends and I ran like a league. Actually played it solo because my friends didn't have a copy, and when they couldn't come over, I'd want to play it anyway. So I'd play games out and keep track of the league and stuff on my computer and everything. But once I got into high school, I got more into historical miniatures gaming, and that was where I then finally started to learn how to paint stuff. But my attention had turned away from the fantasy stuff and Blood Bowl to historical miniatures and Civil War miniatures gaming, and I never really got back into Blood Bowl, the actual tabletop game, after that. I played the PC game, and I've played that in recent years, but it wasn't until a trip to Gen Con just last month that I finally played tabletop Blood Bowl again. Signed up for an event at Gen Con to play it was kind of like an intro to Blood Bowl, which I had signed up for just because I didn't want to sign up for the tournament. They run a tournament at Blood Bowl at Gen Con every year for Blood Bowl, and I didn't have a team or any painted team or anything like that. I hadn't played in a number of years, and well, not a number of years. It was practically been 25 years really since I last played the tabletop version. So I didn't want to sign up for the tournament, and they had this kind of intro session of it where you could learn the rules and play through a game, and I thought, well, that'll be good, kind of a reintroduction to get me back into the tabletop game. And so after I went through that, I had a lot of fun playing that at Gen Con, and thought, well, maybe I'll look for a copy and see if I can find one. The second edition is still out there, and the second edition, the reason the box was a lot thicker is because it came with this styrofoam board that was sculpted. In Blood Bowl, they usually play on a grass field, but there's also this surface that they called astrogranite, which was literally playing on a stone surface, and that was what the second edition came with, was this sort of 3-part styrofoam sculpted board that was astrogranite, which was pretty cool. I've never seen anything like that really since then. Any game that ever came with sculpted styrofoam as a surface, and it looked really good. So I remember having a lot of fun with that, and it had the end zone markers for the different teams and stuff. This version does not have that. It has a classic cardboard mounted board, and there's no overlays of different teams for the end zone, and so that's a little bit disappointing. But eventually, if I can find a good price, I'll look for a copy of second edition too, just to get that board, which I really liked. But here I got this third edition of it. I found a BGG auction that had it unpunched, which is why I wanted to do an unboxing of it, just to get a look at one of these games, out of the box, since they're kind of hard to come by, totally unpunched. I guess the guy that sold this on Board Game Geek bought it shrink wrapped from a local game store, and the owner of the game store said, this sat on a shelf for 20 years and nobody ever bought it. So it's amazing, that some of these dusty old game stores still have classics, shrink wrapped sitting on their shelves that they don't know how valuable they are or don't care. So this guy, he had the copy. He'd taken the shrink wrap off but hadn't done anything else to it, and was selling it on Board Game Geek, so I got a good price for it. I think he'd lowered his reserve to try and move it in his auction, so I jumped on it then. So here we'll take a look at the third edition of Blood Bowl, which it's mostly the same components really as the second edition. Once I looked in it, I think the sculpts of the miniatures are different. They're plastic, and then they were in the second edition too, but the sculpts were different. But things like the plaids and stuff like that are similar to what was in second edition. So set the camera down, pop the lid off, and you can see here some little bases. And I remember in the second edition these bases were crap. It was like difficult for the miniatures never really stayed very well in the bases. So, I guess I ended up swapping bases around on them a lot, so really if you just glued the bases onto them, that would probably work too. Storage wouldn't be as easy. Here's your Blood Bowl dice with the different symbols on them. These are overlays. That's the scatter template, which you'll put over to roll a die, see what direction the ball goes when somebody drops it. Same thing, sideline overlay, which will roll to see where the ball goes when you're on the edge of the board. And then this is the passing template, so it tells you from the distance for a quick pass, short pass, long pass, or a long bomb. You'll start and lay that over the square of the character. And then here, I think the second edition had these two, which are like little sticker things, transfers that you would glue onto the miniatures, so they have numbers on them instead of having to freehand paint. Or if you didn't want to paint, you can use these to add numbers to your guys. And then here's the miniatures themselves. Oops. See if I can focus in on them. Pretty decent for the time. This is, again, these are 20 years old, so this is back when plastic minis were still a fairly new thing. And pretty decent sculpting for them. The other guys here, this is one thing that was new in the sculpts. The catchers. This guy's got like a giant mitt like a catcher's mitt, which definitely was not on the molds of the sculpts in the second edition. And the guys were they were a little more clearly football players in the second edition, and here, some of their armor and stuff is a little bit more of a blend between typical fantasy armor and football kind of pads and stuff. Here are the orcs. Again, definitely different sculpts than what was offered in the second edition of the game. They all have this very like squat, like wide stance, and they were definitely not as squat as that in the second edition. They were closer to the humanoid, closer to size and proportions as the humans in second edition. So there's all the minis still in the sprues, so I've got some work to do to cut those guys off of there. Here's the Blood Bowl Handbook. It's the rule book, and I think this is a little nicer than what was in second edition. I'm not sure if the second edition had the glossy cover on it or not, although I do seem to remember there being like painting examples like this in the second edition one too, but it's not in color on the inside of it, so, and that was the case in the second edition too. And all these rules and stuff I believe have been now superseded. There's an online version, and I'm not sure what sort of version it is. And then here's all the background to the origins of Blood Bowl. I always loved this stuff. In the original, talks about some of the star players, the league, how the league was organized, how the playing field and the game itself has evolved and stuff over the years, and then talks about some of the teams. And there's more in here, I think, about the different teams than there was in the second edition. Because I remember the second edition listed a bunch of teams, but didn't really tell you anything about them. So I kind of had to make up my own backstories on some of these teams in the second edition, which it's cool that they have this stuff added to it for this edition. This looks like an intro. Looks like a quick rules sheet intro with photographs, examples of play and stuff. And then a little painting guide. And I don't remember the second edition having this painting guide either, because I remember color pictures from somewhere. I don't know if it was from the second edition that I had or the issues of White Dwarf that I got after that. But they show you different stage by stage painting guides, which is not as good as stuff you could find on their website these days, where you've got videos and things like that. That can be a real help. And so here's some counters and stuff. A little star player card here to print out, all still in the sprues. Here is a pad of roster sheets, which also, I don't remember any of these in the second edition though, but man, it's been over 25 years since I had that second edition, so I just don't remember when I first cracked open the box what was in there. That'll be, I guess, another sort of a nostalgic purchase if I ever get a copy of the second edition of the game. See if I can find an unpunched copy of that. That would be a hell of a lot more expensive than the unpunched third edition copy, I will say that. More star players here. And again, second edition, I don't remember having these sort of glossy cards of the star players. And then this is weird here, that this is a reference card that's on like really good glossy thick cardstock, but weirdly you actually punch it out. It's just one solid sheet, but you punch it out of this board, which is interesting. You don't really see that anymore. Usually these kind of cards will already come just, even if they were this thick and glossy, they wouldn't come attached to a larger sheet that they've been printed on. So it's definitely a sign of a sort of an antiquated printing style here. And they have these for humans and orcs. I don't know if other editions ever had cardstock for different types of teams, for you know, elf and dwarf teams or whatever. It'd be nice if there was something like that. And then same thing here. These are the side, your dugouts and your tracks and stuff for the game, for each side. And you just stick this up next to the board and keep track of all your stuff. And then last but not least is the board itself. And I'll set the camera down again. Fold the tripod. And so I can open up the board. What I may do is all this other stuff back in the box. Room on the table to open up the board all the way. This is upside down that way. Top. And there we go. So this board, you know, a little more travel friendly than the 3-section styrofoam board, and obviously not as fragile as styrofoam, which is going to dent and ding and chip and possibly break if you don't take good care of it. So I think that's one reason they moved in the 3rd edition to a, you know, typical board games type mounted board. Was, you know, probably complaints that the styrofoam board from the previous edition was too fragile. But you can see, and then lots of cool details on the board here. You know, you've got rubble and stuff in the end zones there, where the turf has worn itself out, and you know, things like bones and assorted body parts laying on the field. You've got somebody's leg with a boot still in it. So just some little, a little bit of flavor text. And definitely the board is wider than the styrofoam board was, because my recollection is that this end zone here is a lot longer than it was on the in the 2nd edition version, because the 2nd edition had these overlays that laid over the end zone with the team names on them, which I loved, but they were a lot shorter. I want to say they probably came to about there. So interesting that I don't remember the dimensions of the board changing between versions, but maybe they did. So anyway, there you have it. That's a look inside the box at the 3rd edition of Blood Bowl. There hasn't been any new editions printed. This was the last printed edition. I don't know if Games Workshop will ever print a new version of the game or not, or whether they'll cede it over to Fantasy Flight, who has the rights to do, you know, card games and board games for Games Workshop properties. That's why they did a card game of the Blood Bowl property. But you know, maybe they can. It'd be nice if maybe they could get the license from Games Workshop, which doesn't seem to want to support the game anymore, despite the fact that it's still very popular. And in fact, there's a new PC version coming out just like this month or next month. So and it'll be interesting to see where the license for the property goes in the future.